Hi, folks. It's been a while. I've been saying for a little while now I would do some further thoughts. I've been doing these really random theological little noodles. I called them the Rambling Rector. I did one of them seated here in this very place, and a couple of them rambling around the church. And there was that sort of little jokey thing about rambling both physically and mentally, verbally, as I often do. But I've decided I think I would just like to present some ongoing thoughts without the distraction of a moving background and without pretending that it's just a kind of jokey, rambling thing. Because I think many of the thoughts we have in the church, many of the theological considerations and discussions do inform our daily living. They're important for us to get to grips with and to a certain degree to enjoy, thinking about, grappling with. But many of these things will influence the way we live, the way we express our spirituality, the way that we engage with theological thinking and living. And I want to encourage theological thinking and living because I think to a certain degree it's a dearth of theology that the church is suffering from, or rather a multiplicity of theologies. There's so many different ways that people approach faith, and yet we only remained half or semi informed by many of them. And so I just want to give you some food for thought. And I did some stuff about uh, creation, God the creator, the language that we use for God, why theological words are important. And then I did something about Jesus. I started on the Jesus trip. And I talked about incarnation, why incarnation was important, why this idea of God engaging with us as a human being, but still fully inspired, filled with, and made of the substance of the divine, was really important to us as we engage in our own theological uh, approach and living these things out in the world. So I want to continue along the Jesus thing. In the tradition I grew up in, you could have kind of almost been forgiven for thinking that nothing happened between the virgin birth and the crucifixion. And even the resurrection of Christ was not necessarily engaged with. It was a, yay, this is amazing, it's happened. But the real focus came down to what happened on that cross, what happened with the death of Jesus. And it was, in many ways, a very negative thing. It reminded us of how bad and evil and wicked we all were, and that without Jesus dying an agonizing death, then there's no way that we would have any relationship with God, that God's love was somehow blocked by our badness, our wickedness, our sinfulness, a very individualized view of sin. It was all about you, you and your wickedness. And you were encouraged to feel bad until Jesus made you feel good again. That's just one approach to the death of Jesus, and it misses out so often on the midst of what's going on. I went to a session at Greenbelt, a big Christian arts and teaching festival in England, or rather an arts festival with a Christian foundation and background. And John Bell, Scottish theologian and minister, part of the Iona community, John shared a session called Don't Think of What Would Jesus Do, WWJD. Think instead about what Jesus actually said and did. And we have four gospels, these stories, parables, stories of and stories about Jesus. And it's so important for us to engage with all of that whole breadth and depth. And many of the stories have been, we would say, in a more progressive way of thinking. Many of them have been mythologized. Many of them have been created to give a certain meaning to many of the stories Jesus told. So we often find that a miracle story or a miraculous healing story will be next to another piece of teaching. It will be next to, so the casting out of a demon by the great authority that Jesus held within himself, the exousia, the power that comes from within. Exousia means from the substance of you. That will come next to a story about Jesus's authority, or some teaching that Jesus gives about his authority, or a parable that he gives about the authority that he has to speak the word of God into any given situation. So the Gospels are really carefully constructed, but still within them there is something that we seek called the kerygma, the essential teaching of what it is about Jesus that gives us an example to live by, that challenges us in the way that we live, and that encourages us to engage with following this person who is Jesus Christ here and now, and still able to relate to the person who is Jesus Christ. So that's a really important way to begin our journeys in this exploration of theology, to come back to the idea of actually reading the stories that come from, as far as we know, most of them certainly, that come from Jesus, and the stories about Jesus, and to actually grapple with the words Jesus said, or the record of the words, the record of what people remembered of the words that were said, and also the way in which those have been interpreted and used, many of them multi-layered, multifaceted over the years. And so I encourage us again to read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are known as the Synoptic Gospels, for they all seem to share common sources, and they all seem to have a similar viewpoint. Synoptic means from the same viewpoint. And then the Gospel of John, which seems to be very much more a meditation and reflection on the stories of Jesus. And they all have their merits, they all are worth engaging with. And I would also say they are worth engaging with prayerfully and meditatively in themselves. There have been many writers throughout the centuries that encourage us to place ourselves in the stories where people encounter Jesus, to meditate on how it would have felt to have been a person at the back of the crowd in the feeding of the 5,000. Admittedly, we already have the person in the back of the crowd at the feeding of the 5,000, if we've ever watched The Life of Brian. But apart from that, to use that as a spiritual exercise and an opportunity for us to get to grips again with what Jesus is recorded as having said and done, and why that still has meaning and resonance for us here today. I think that's all I want to say on this at this time. It's been longer than I planned, at 8 minutes according to the live counter next to me. I want to go on, and one of the reasons I've been put off doing this is because there is so much to say, and I'm trying to put it in some kind of order, and sometimes that doesn't always work for me. I'm more of a random, spontaneous thinker and doer. But I think next time I would like to talk a little bit more about theories of the atonement, what did happen on the cross, and why in some traditions the neglect of this resurrection narrative, this story of new life, should never be lost. And it defines why all of the other stuff that comes in the Jesus story is so important to us. So, trying not to ramble too much, trying to talk about the importance of these ways of thinking and being. I encourage you to do your own explorations. If you have any questions, if you want to reflect that, maybe I talk too quickly and I need to slow down or make it shorter, I'm more than willing to hear from you. And if there's anything it would help for me to give some clarity on, please do get in touch. God bless you, and thank you for being a part of this conversation.